Hello, I'm the Pink Phantom. Welcome to my podcast, where we will go deep into the lair of the purple worm instead of down into the rabbit hole, where we'll voyage into the astral realm of my mind and explore the verse of nerd culture. This is Phantom Thoughts. In this episode, I've got a lot of call-ins, a variety of call-ins from Jason of the Nerds RPG Variety Cast. Some of his call-ins are about the difference between system mastery and player skill and metagaming that I covered in my last episode. I've actually cut up a couple of one of his call-ins may sound a little strange because it was split between two topics and I cut it into parts so I could respond to each one separately. I also have call-ins on the topic of system mastery versus metagaming from Spencer, aka Free Thrall from the Keep Off the Borderlands podcast, Kevin from the Red Caps podcast, and Joe from the Hindsightless podcast. I'd like to thank all these guys for calling in, and I'm going to have a fairly extensive response to that entire topic again at the end of the episode. But until then, let's get on with a few calls from Jason.
And I am still using the Anchor app at the moment. Mine hasn't reverted. My Discovery tab hasn't gone away. I know a lot of people's have. The Anchor apocalypse is on us. I am setting up a Google Voice number, but there are going to be limitations to that, obviously, with international calling. And we're an international community, right? Worldwide community. So we'll see how that shakes out. But, yeah, I don't know who's going to be the last person I call using the Anchor app. It might be you. We'll find out. But take care of yourself. Hope to talk to you soon.
It turns out I was the last person that Jason called before he lost the Discovery tab on his app and could no longer send messages through the app on Anchor. He did set up both a Google Voice and a SpeakPipe option to message him. And of course, you can still message him through the web browser version of Anchor. So I provided his Google Voice number and links to SpeakPipe and to his Anchor webpage in the show notes. And I do have on my blog, I have a post that I'm continuing to update with various anchorites and links to their Anchor webpage. And if they have a YouTube that I'm aware of, their YouTube webpage, you can't send a message to that, but just if you're interested. And I'm also going to start adding, if they have a SpeakPipe option or a Google Voice option, I'm going to add those as well. I will have a link to that in the show notes of the podcast.
Hey, Jason here. I hear what you're saying about Grok, and maybe I'm not giving it a fair shake. And to be fair, 100%, I've not played it. And I'm the first to tell you, you really can't judge a game until you play it, because some games play much better than they read. I tend not to like that kind of abstraction of, you know, the way it's trying to balance what you were talking about, the maybe social aspects with equipment and this and that. And so mixing those slots, you know, kind of rubs me a little bit the wrong way. But I haven't played it, and I would definitely give it a shot. So if there was an opportunity at some point to give it try it in one shot or whatever, I would be happy to do that to see. And who knows, maybe I'll even try to run it at some point. So I do appreciate your, pointing that out, and I do need to be open-minded to try it, even though initially reading it I didn't warm up to it.
I agree that you're not going to know how things work out until you play a game. And it is unusual just to lump everything, inventory, relationships, any kind of resource you have to draw on into just one category. I just thought from that standpoint, having everything related so all your decisions are going to affect what you can do down the road beyond just, I have these things on me and I can use them, but just, you're carrying too much. So it puts you kind of at a disadvantage if you have a fail on an action that you take and you suffer a consequence of that. You're either going to damage something that you have or someone that you have a relationship with, or you're going to damage yourself and your own ability to continue to do things down the road until you take an action to somehow overcome that obstacle or that condition or circumstance that you find yourself in. I just thought it was a very interesting thing how to tie everything together, and it's all down there on your character sheet, and as long as, as soon as you kind of internalize that relationship between how everything works, you almost, as a player, wouldn't even have to look at the rules.
As far as OSR and bad actors, sure, they're bad actors in the OSR, but they're bad actors in other areas of role-playing games too, right? So I guess I don't understand why there's that compulsion. We have to mention the bad actors with the OSR, but we don't talk about the white supremacist murderers that write role-playing games that aren't OSR games, right? And I don't think I need to name who I'm talking about. I think you know, and I think other people probably know. But, there's other games out there that are written by horrible, horrible people. But when we talk about role-playing games in general, we don't mention them. So why do we need to mention the bad actors when we talk about the OSR? When, like RPG a Day, the point's to be positive. So why can't we do the same thing with the OSR? Why is there the caveat? But you have to say the bad actors or apologize for them. But we're not apologizing for them in RPG a Day for general RPGs,
Right. And I probably miscommunicated a little bit on that. I wasn't really talking about we need to discuss the bad actors or whatever during October when we're talking about the OSR, but just bringing it up as we were having the discussion about should there even be an OctoSR, because just as we were getting started, there was the idea of let's do this. Okay, why do it? What's different from RPG a Day? And that was just a reason that I know that not even necessarily bad actors, but just the bad reputation of the OSR in some circles, which, as I've been looking back and looking into, kind of OSR and what kind of defines it to deal with my own way of how I'm going to do OctoSR, it's an idea that goes back quite a bit, that there's an issue with people who are self-proclaimed OSR, or there's an issue with OSR culture. Not even necessarily some of these specific issues with specific people that also pop up a lot, and I think are actually a more recent phenomenon. But the just the general idea of the old guy syndrome, and it's the older players wanting to hold back the newer players or tell them what D&D is. That just gatekeeping kind of mindset is really the big thing. Although there is, in some circles, there are other things, other issues tied to the OSR. But I do agree that, once this is a thing that we're doing in October, and from this point forward, it should be about, this is what's good about the OSR. This is why people like OSR style games, and this is what we're about and what we want to draw attention to and what we'd like to see more of in the RPG hobby in general. And we use OSR as just a shorthand of talking about those ideas. And I think there is something to, I guess, call it the bad actor syndrome, because there are people who lean into that stuff. There are people who self-identify as OSR and have tried to label themselves as OSR and representative of OSR, and they've taken on the kind of crusader mentality of, we're cleaning up the bad things that have crept into role-playing since the beginnings. There are people out there who lean into that bad boy image, I guess if you want to call it that they specifically bring it up. They refer to themselves as, they're the defenders of the proper way of doing things, or they try to express themselves in a way where they're intentionally trying to stir people up. And I think that is something that OctoSR can help do, is it can help combat that. It can have the people who don't want to be gatekeepers and who don't want to be stirring the pot all the time, but just enjoy playing the game the way they've played it since, if they've been playing since the 70s, if they've been playing since the 80s or the early 90s, since the 80s or early 90s. But it's a way for folks with good intentions and who see positive value in playing things in OSR style to express their enthusiasm for that style of gaming without getting into an identity politics situation or getting into a what is the right way, what is the wrong way. Because, I mean, it's RPGs. There's not a right way and a wrong way. There's the way that works for you and your group. But but like you said, I agree 100%. It shouldn't be, well, there's these bad actors and here's why the bad actors aren't representative and here's why they're not. It's a show, don't tell situation. It's show what's great about OSR play. I think that's what it should be. That was a long way of saying that.
Now, as far as Taylor's call, and I apologize, I don't mean to sound antagonistic with that last call. I guess I just find it frustrating. It's it's like when you get RPG.net and every topic with Call of Cthulhu, Lovecraft was racist. Yes, we know Lovecraft was racist, but I have a question about the chase rules in Call of Cthulhu. Okay, but you have to realize Lovecraft was a racist. And I get it, and I do get the need to point out these things, but sometimes it just gets overbearing, I guess. That's just my opinion. And I'm not defending any bad actors or anything like that, but sometimes I think no publicity, not mentioning them, is just as effective as giving them the free airtime. But, but again, I apologize for coming across adversarially with you because that's not my intent.
I didn't take you at all for being adversarial or antagonistic in what you were saying. I didn't. I took it more as you just being frustrated with kind of that focus on that particular very negative idea of the OSR and how it pops up and is just, anytime the OSR pops up, there are some things that trigger certain responses in some people, and they're always going to bring a counterpoint, and that's a large part of what RPG Twitter seems to be sometimes. Is somebody says something and it triggers somebody else to say I have to say this, and that in turn triggers somebody to say I have to say this, and it's back and it's forth, and it's well-worn arguments and well-worn points, and it has a lot of times it has nothing to do with the initial tweet or post. But yeah, I fully understand the frustration with it, and I fully understand what you were saying, and you don't have to worry about that. You call into my show and you get frustrated and you want to express your frustration. That's fine. I'm not going to take that personally, having listened to your show and gotten calls from you and stuff. I'm not going to take that personally. And that goes for pretty much anybody out there in the Anchorite community. I mean, obviously, if somebody new calls in that hasn't called in before or has a show that I haven't listened to, there could be miscommunication there, because even when you're in a room with somebody, sometimes interpreting tone and words are hard, but that's something we can work through. That's something we can work through as people. So no, I don't take any offense to anything you said, Jason.
Hey, Pink Phantom, Spencer here. Just wanted to say I've really been enjoying the show, and I particularly like the way you defined player skill versus metagaming. That idea that player skill is about knowing the system mastery, and using that to inform play, as opposed to metagaming, which would be about knowing the lore of the setting and using that in-world knowledge to inform play when your character wouldn't actually have that information. So I thought that was really nicely delineated, and look forward to hearing more. Great stuff. Bye.
I'm pretty much on the same boat as you as far as your description, as far as metagaming versus player skill, versus whatever. I pretty much agree with the way you laid it out, so cool. Now, to finish your show out, you talked about Taylor's show over Clarksville Ringmail. And, it's funny, as I was listening to that show, paused it after he gave those examples and called in on the exact same thing. The same thing you mentioned. The example I gave, I think, was that, yes, they had just fought this bugbear. They would know about how tough they are to kill. But metagaming would be if a beholder showed up and one of the players or one of the player characters knew what every single eye stalk did. That would be metagaming, right? Now, if they're a scholar, maybe, but a first level character of any sort isn't, if they're not going to know everything a beholder can do, right? But so that would obviously be metagaming, but knowing a troll is vulnerable to fire isn't necessarily metagaming because that's common knowledge that's talked about in taverns. And later on, that show does get better, though. I do recommend people listen to it because they do have some interesting discussions later on, even about in-game seminars players hold.
Planning for level 20 when you are level 1 leads to the fear of losing your character. The fear of losing your character leads to you thinking that your character is more important than everybody else's. Thinking your character is more important than everyone else's leads to power gaming and rules lawyering. Power gaming and rule lawyers lead to the dark side. The dark side results in a game where poor character decisions are rewarded because there is no fail state. It's Kevin calling in from the Red Caps podcast. Just wanted to say I enjoyed your metagaming episode. I would argue that there is a difference between system mastery and metagaming, especially when it comes to the topic of player builds. Your characters don't know everything that could possibly happen to them in the future. They don't have that full picture. So if you're planning all that out, that is definitely metagaming and not system mastery. Your character should discover things as they go and upgrade as it makes sense to them in a moment. Anyhow, just my thought.
What's up, Pink Phantom? So my mission after I finish recording this is to figure out how to get it to you, but that's a problem for another hour. Anyway, awesome episode on player skill, metagaming, and system mastery. Yeah, man. An example I should have brought up in my call into Clerics Wear Ringmail is the whole idea of, say, like the 10-foot pole, right? Like, that's a common trope in old school gaming. Down in a heap, the theme song, "Don't be a dope, bring your pole, oil, or rope." Okay, so that's a common trope. If you're playing in a old school game, you should know to bring that kind of stuff. But would a first level character know to bring that kind of stuff that's never been out on an adventure before? And that's sort of what I was trying to get at with my question, though I thought Taylor and his guest, whose name will never stick in my head for whatever reason, I don't know. I thought they did an awesome job of answering it. But yeah, that's kind of my thing, is using a 10-foot pole as a character who's never been out on an adventure before. Is that metagaming? Like, because you as a player know there's going to be a bunch of traps around. So I don't, or is that system mastery, or is that using player knowledge that the characters wouldn't know? I don't know, man. And here's another example that I ran into. I was running a game of Monster Hearts one time, and to start off the game, there was basically a cutscene of a kid getting kidnapped. The players, or the characters, had no idea. They were in school. They had no idea. And I mentioned, after the cutscene, and we go to the characters in school, I mentioned that this particular NPC, whatever, wasn't at school, but that wasn't unusual for them. They tended to miss school. And because there was that cutscene, one of the players then had their characters go off and start looking for this character, for this NPC, when the PC would have no real reason to have done that in the first place. They asked later on if that was metagaming. I sort of feel like it was. It didn't ruin anything. It wasn't bad or anything like that. But yeah, it was the whole idea of that character would have no idea that anything fishy was going on, yet the player did, and they sent their character off on a mission to go investigate. So yeah, is that metagaming? Is using a 10-foot pole and bringing rope on all your adventures, is that metagaming? Or is that player skill? I don't know, man. It's all a big mess, right? Anyway, now I got to try and figure out how to get this to you, dude. Awesome stuff. Peace out.
So, as you can tell, Joe did find a way to get me his message. He sent it to me as a direct message on Discord. It may not be called direct messages on Discord, but there's so many social media things, and they call the same thing a different thing that I'm not worried about it. I'm calling it a direct message. I think everybody knows what I'm talking about. So, getting back into this discussion, and I think the main line that people are looking for is between metagaming and system mastery, at least based on my definitions, what I covered in my last episode. Because player skill, I think I pretty clearly defined, was the players using in-game, in-world knowledge that their characters have to inform good decisions by their characters. I think that's what I mean by I don't think that's what I mean by player skill. That is what I mean by player skill. And so I hope that I have made that part clear. System mastery and metagaming both have to do with player knowledge beyond what the characters have. It may be player knowledge of the system they're working in. It may be player knowledge of the world, the general world, what's located in game books, like specifically in Monster Manual. That's some of the most specific issues, I think, with metagaming, is people using knowledge of creatures that they couldn't possibly know about and have never encountered. Where system mastery is using your skills with the systems of the game in a constructive way, really. Not in a selfish way, not in a way to make yourself the star, not in a way to get an advantage in the game world that's really unfair to other characters, and maybe even unfair to the challenges you're facing, where you basically just bypass the challenges because, you read the module. There's a trap right there and there's a secret door over there, so let's go over there and go through the secret door. So where is the line? And the problem with drawing the line is that depending on the system, it's in different places. If you have an RPG system, an RPG game system that has a meta currency, that is a knowledge that characters don't have. That is not in-game knowledge. It may be expressed in the fiction somehow to try to tie it all together, but in a lot of cases, it's just layered on top of that. And you have to have knowledge of that, and you have to have use of that to make use of the system. Otherwise, you might as well be playing something else. So the way I draw the line is, what does the system expect of you? Is there something like metacurrency that you need to know outside of the character's knowledge and use effectively outside the character's knowledge to play the game? And if you do that, if you do what the system expects you to do, then that's not metagaming. Where you run into metagaming is where players go out of their way to really circumvent difficulties. They want to circumvent a challenge by using knowledge that their characters don't have. But anything else, I think, falls more in line with system mastery. To get to Joe's specific examples, the 10-foot pole, the coil of rope. I would argue that in a D&D setting, and I'm working mostly from D&D knowledge here, that in a D&D setting, knowing to buy those items, to have those items on hand before you go on your first adventure, is not metagaming. And my argument is this: it's in the player's handbook. It's in the player's handbook of what you can buy, of items you can take with you. So that says to me that those are general use items for adventurers anyway, maybe not for everyone in the game world, but for adventurers, that they're available to you unless during prep for the campaign, the GM says it's not. Because, when you get together for whether it's a formal session 0, this is session 0, so we're going to do X, Y, Z, or it's just a case of the GM saying, hey, I'm running this type of game. This is the kind of system I'm going to use. This is the information that your characters will have. This is the style of game we're going to play. or whether it's a discussion, not the GM telling people, but what do you want to do? This is what I'm thinking we should do in terms of, it's going to be dungeon delves, or it's going to be hex crawls, or it's going to be a political campaign that mainly takes place in and around the Emperor's Court. It's going to be urban adventures centered in a large city that's as big as a modern megacity. Things like that. And when you sit down and discuss those things, there are things that are in-world that are part of your character's background, maybe, or they're just part of general knowledge that everyone in that world knows. And, what's located in a store or in a, with a vendor, with a merchant, that's commonly enough available that it's listed, in that manual, that is something that is available, and you have some ideas why. So, if your character buys a 10-foot pole right after you drum them up and carries it around with you, okay, you're good, from my perspective. Now, there was a... Now, carrying around a 10-foot pole isn't easy, unless it's some sort of a retractable pole that'll shrink down and fit in a backpack, because, it's 10 feet long. You're going to be carrying it around like an extra large staff, or you're going to be carrying it on your shoulder, and you get into a Three Stooges situation where you're whacking your fellow party members in the head. But again, that's, managing that kind of thing, I think, could fall into the way of player skill. Here's how we're toting this thing. We're going to tie it to the horse this way. No, not sideways, because we don't want to fall down when we run between trees. We're tying it to the horse this way. So, long story short, I don't think items you can buy that are available to first level characters are metagaming if you buy them. Now, you may be using some purely player knowledge to say, yeah, we're going to need that, especially if it's, that there's a DM. You're playing with a DM that he has a fondness for pit traps. So, yeah, we need to make sure we have that. That's a little metagaming in concept, but it's also something he knows what you know what he knows, and it's all good within the game world. As far as the Monster Hearts story that Joe told, I'm not that familiar with Monster Hearts. I've read up a little bit on it. But from my perspective, if I were playing in the game, if I were running the game as a GM, I would say that since it is a scene, it's a cut scene that the players didn't specifically participate in, but it is something that happened in world. And in a world like Monster Hearts, where the characters are rather extraordinary compared to regular folks, and you see this trope in all kinds of fiction, in books, in movies, and TV. Sometimes characters just have an intuition. Sometimes they have a bad feeling, and sometimes they follow that bad feeling without even knowing why. And it may not even be addressed within the narrative of the story, of the TV show, of the movie, of the book, exactly why they had that bad feeling. It moved the story forward. And so I think if the point of the cutscene was that this is something the players are going to deal with at some point, yes, what that player did may have pushed forward into that story earlier than the game master thought it would, but it's going to get you to that point either way. So, yes, it's player knowledge, not character knowledge, but it's still something that occurred within the game world. And it's possible in a world that's not like ours, and sometimes even in a world that is like ours, for things that seem disconnected, that seem like there's no way X could know Y that gets them to Z, that you do anyway. Some people call it serendipity, some people call it synchronicity, some people call it random chance, some people call it fate, some people call it luck. But if it's something that's within that game system, and I'm guessing since there was a cutscene that existed, period, anyway, that it is something that was within either that particular adventure or that game system, or that GM's idea of what they were going, opportunities the players were going to have to move forward into whatever narrative the characters ended up playing out in. So I would say it's probably right on the line, but it's not over the line between system mastery and metagaming. As for Kevin's call-in, which I loved, by the way, I loved the whole Yoda situation you had going on there, Kevin, but I disagree. Now, if it's solely out of fear of losing your character, or if it's solely out of wanting to be better than the other characters, then yes, that slides the scale maybe into metagaming. Well, wanting to just be better than the other players' characters, that is definitely metagaming. Being afraid of losing your character, probably more metagaming than not. But what I was specifically talking about was players using knowledge of the system to avoid a stumbling point in that system. I was talking specifically about D&D 3 and its derivatives, where due to the open game license and the just plethora of options available for characters, it was possible to put together a combination where a few levels in, suddenly you're no longer on the same plane as the rest of your party. It's kind of the opposite of the I planned my character to be this absolute gonzo character that just overpowers every situation. I put my character together. I didn't think it through. I didn't plan it well enough. And now it's nerfed. My character is nerfed. Because that presents a problem not just for the player of that character, but for the GM. Because now if the GM throws a challenge that's more relevant to the level of the other players, that player is at an extreme disadvantage. On the other hand, if the GM throws a lot of challenges at the party that are more relevant to the level of what that character is capable of doing, the other characters will find it far too easy. There's no challenge there. So I think in games like that, where how the character fits together, there's a line between metagaming and system mastery, but I think it is system mastery just to stay relevant. Now, I agree that planning from A to Z is going to be difficult, but again, depending on what kind of a startup you have for your campaign, what kind of information the GM gives out, or what kind of a campaign all the players, including the GM, agree on is going to be in this campaign and the kind of things we're going to do, it is possible. Going back to something I just previously mentioned, if you know you're going to spend just about your entire campaign in the Emperor's Court, then you know that there are going to be more social dynamics than combat dynamics. There's going to be more emphasis on maybe on relationships than on pure martial power or pure magical power. And you're going to mold your character appropriately. And that's not even necessarily a case of player knowledge. That's a case of this is the world you're in, and your player knows the world you're in. And people, whether they're people in our world or people in RPGs, they generally have a plan. They're not just, well, that happened, so let me change up what I'm training tomorrow. They have a plan where they want to be. People decide where they want to go to school. What do they want to study? What kind of job do they want to have? What kind of training do they want to do? What kind of summer job do they want to get that may help them get the job they want later down the line? What are their hobbies? What are their interests? Where do they want to be from a personal standpoint? 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road. So I think it's perfectly acceptable for, an adventurer that is essentially going to be maybe your job, maybe your calling, maybe your personal interest, maybe all three strung together. I think it's I think it's perfectly reasonable that somebody at least plots that out. Now, the world may throw you a curveball and you change, but that's available. You're not locked in the system. You're not locked in and say, okay, I'm planning to do this at 3rd level, and this at 7th level, and this at 10th level, and this at 12th level, and this at 17th level, and this at 20th level. By the time you get to 7th level, you may have changed. Circumstances may have changed. Your character may have evolved through the stories that they have been through, the challenges that they have faced, the losses they've had, the victories they've had may change their perspective. And you can do that. But having the ability to sit down and say, okay, if I do, knowing the world I'm in, if I do these things, I should be able to meet 3rd level challenges at 3rd level, and 7th level challenges at 7th level, and 15th level challenges at 15th level. And I think that's okay. Now, in a more old school environment where the idea of, if you're 15th level, you're going to face 15th level challenges is not necessarily a thing. You may face a 15th level challenge at 3rd level and a 3rd level challenge at 15th level. Because the world is just set up and it's doing its thing, and as long as the GM gives you, enough information as you're moving around, as you're traveling around, as you're making decisions, that you have a little foresight and don't just stumble into a total party kill, or don't just constantly find yourself up against opponents or adversaries that you can overwhelm or outguess or outplan, then that's fine. But just planning out your character from beginning to end, to me, there are certain systems that demand it. Again, the line between system mastery and metagaming is system dependent, and it's intent dependent. It's possible to innocently metagame, I think, but most of the time, if you're metagaming, it's intentional. Or you just don't understand the system you're playing, the world you're in. And that's really, I think, the biggest threat. Well, threat, that's a terrible word. But I think the biggest danger of, it's not really dangerous, but I think the biggest situation that you might find where you end up metagaming sometimes is if you go from a system that demands more metagaming, demands use of metacurrency, demands planning out your characters to more detail at the beginning of the campaign, to a game that's just more off the cuff, then certainly the idea of metagaming may rear its head more often. So I guess to sum up, what I'm going to say is metagaming versus system mastery. What game system are you playing? What is the intention of the person that's doing the act? And reading the module ahead of time or memorizing the monster manual is probably metagaming in most situations. There could be situations where it's not, but in most situations, reading ahead, where it's like knowing the book before the book, as the book is being written. Hey, I know how all this is coming out, so I'm going to put myself in position where I'm the winner. And I think that's really what it comes down to. The idea of, I want to be the winner. Whatever happens, I want to beat the GM. I want to be better than my fellow players, PCs. I want to be the winner. That's really the attitude of metagaming. Everything else, it's going to fall on a scale. So I hope that's cleared up a little more my thoughts on system mastery versus metagaming. And that's going to do it for another episode of Phantom Thoughts. If you have any feedback you'd like to leave, you can contact me by leaving a voice message at anchor.fm/the-pink-phantom, or you can send an email to thepinkphantom1@gmail.com, or you can contact me on Twitter @thepinkphantom. The music in this episode was Strength of the Titans and Late Night Radio by Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license from creativecommons.org/licenses/by/4.0.